So the other day, we had a decision in Colorado from their state Supreme Court where they said, sorry, Trump can't be on the presidential ballot. Why? Because he violated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which is the insurrection clause. And as a direct result of that, he's not allowed to hold office anymore. If you have an issue with that, take it up with the Constitution, because the Constitution is pretty clear in its language. More on that in a little bit. We'll talk about that. Well, surprisingly, certain people have come out of the woodwork to disagree with the courts on that. Now, by the way, I should point out, it's not just the Colorado Supreme Court. It's also the Maine Secretary of State who've come out and said Trump can't run. There's also 7 or 8 other examples in other states of various governing officials who say, no, it's actually Trump can run. So there's a clear disagreement here state by state. And by the way, I think there's probably going to be more states that come out and say, sorry, Trump can't run. So you might have a situation where it's like 6 or 7 different states say he can't run, the rest of them say they can run, and then this has to be resolved at the Supreme Court. Basically the only way we could really resolve it, right? Well, like I said, it kind of surprised me that certain people came out of the woodwork and said, no, I disagree with this and Trump should be allowed to run. All right, so let me give you the first one here. This is Cornel West. He says, we must be very careful in celebrating this decision by the Colorado Supreme Court. It's true that Brother Trump is a bona fide gangster and neo-fascist who must be held accountable. At the same time, we don't want the courts deciding the outcome of elections. This power must reside with and for the people. The Democrats should not rely on the courts as a mechanism to circumvent Brother Biden's anemic poll numbers. We want truth and justice and love in American politics. So to be fair to Cornel West, I've heard him take the position on other Trump court cases. He has taken the position, no, I looked at the evidence. I think he's guilty. Having this court case is totally legitimate. Like, I think, for example, I don't know if it's the Georgia case or the Jack Smith case, but clearly he looks at the evidence in those instances and he goes, look, this is a criminal who committed a crime who needs to be held accountable, so I'm okay with these cases moving forward. But he says on this particular issue of whether or not he can run, he goes, I disagree. I think he should be allowed to run. Okay. It's kind of hilarious, too, when he calls him a gangster and a neo-fascist. But he's like, yeah, you should be able to hold office. Well, it's almost like fascists by definition don't even believe in democracy in their own respect. So he can try to rely on democracy when it's convenient and then turn around and be like, we shouldn't have democracy when he tries to steal the last election. I don't know. It seems a little bit contradictory there to almost like let the fascist exploit the system to his own ends, even though he doesn't believe in the system or abide by the system, right? But anyway, let me give you more. So Marianne Williamson also comes out and says, I agree Donald Trump shouldn't be kept off the ballot by secretaries of state. And it's equally undemocratic that Dean Phillips and myself are kept off ballots due to secretaries of state doing the bidding of the DNC. All right, so let me pause here to say this. Marianne, don't compare those things. Don't compare those things. You and Dean Phillips, and Cenk Uygur, by the way, didn't do an insurrection. You didn't do an insurrection. You should be on the ballot because you have every right to be on the ballot. I think that's pretty simple and straightforward. Trump is a totally different scenario. He tried to do an insurrection. Now, I'm going to get to the legal argument in a second where we will go through the direct text of the Constitution, and you guys can make up your own mind as to whether or not you think it's fair what Colorado did and what Maine did. But my issue here is I find both Cornel West's point and Marianne Williamson's point, it's very glib. It's very like, oh, I should come out and say he should be allowed on the ballot because I know I should be allowed on. So would it be hypocritical of me to say he should be off the ballot, but I should be on the ballot? You almost get the sense that they're fearful of the charge of hypocrisy, right? And Cornel wants to be on all the ballots, running as an independent, and Marianne Williamson wants to be on the ballot, running as in the Democratic primary. And so they're like, well, I can't come out and say Trump should be kicked off because I want to be on it. But here's the thing again. You're not a hypocrite if you say he shouldn't be on the ballot. You're just applying the law of the land and the plain text of the Constitution because he tried to do an insurrection and you guys didn't. Okay, so in other words, I don't like these glib arguments of like, well, I think he should be on. Okay, why? What's your reasoning as to why he should be? Like, there's no actual addressing of the substantive legal argument here. It's just like, I don't know, I think he should probably be on because democracy is something. Okay, well, if it's quote unquote democracy is your biggest concern, why isn't Cornel West and why isn't Marianne Williamson running on repealing term limits? Term limits are by definition anti-democratic. It says you can't vote for this person again because we limit the president to 2 terms. So if you're, democracy is the ultimate thing. Okay, well then why is neither one of you have ever said or put in your platform, well, we want to abolish term limits because it's anti-democratic. In other words, the point I'm trying to make is something could be quote unquote undemocratic, but also legally correct, right? Something could be undemocratic and not authoritarian. In fact, quite the opposite. It would be anti-authoritarian to try to say the authoritarian can't keep doing authoritarian things, right? Okay. But let me give you one more example. So it's not just Cornel West. It's not just Marianne Williamson. There was one, Cenk Uygur seemingly said on Twitter that he thinks Trump should be allowed to run. But then he and Anna released a segment where he kind of said the opposite, where he's like, no, I understand why he wouldn't be allowed to run, and I kind of support that decision. So I'm a little confused on what Cenk's position is. But now let me give you this, because Axelrod comes out and says the same thing. David Axelrod says he thinks it would rip the country apart if Trump were prevented from running. So just so everybody understands, David Axelrod is a former top Obama advisor. He's big in like corporate democratic politics, centrist democratic politics, and he echoes a very similar point here. Former Obama advisor David Axelrod warned Friday that a court decision removing President Trump from the primary ballot would rip the country apart as legal questions mount over his candidate qualifications. Well, let me just point this out to David Axelrod. This is a horrible argument. Why? Because the country is being ripped apart no matter what. If Trump wins the primary and wins the general, guess what? The country's ripped apart. You'll see the biggest protest you've ever seen, maybe even some riots in the process. Country's ripped apart. If Trump wins the primary but loses the general, he's going to say he won the general even though he didn't. Country's going to be ripped apart. Trump loses the primary, he's going to say, no, this was stolen from me. I actually won the primary. And again, every single scenario, you have potential violence, potential civil unrest, potential riots. So this idea of like, oh, this could rip the country apart. Literally anything that happens from now on could rip the country apart. So stop saying because of this one scenario, this is unique in the sense that this will tear the country apart. No, there's like 7 different scenarios. All of them could tear the country apart. It's like this path of least resistance, bullshit, cuckish attitude of like, oh, don't poke the bear of Trump. No matter what you do, he will be a problem, period. No matter what happens, he will be a problem. Let's get this naive idea out of our mind. Oh, you can't ever disagree with him or call him on his bullshit or call him on his crimes because that might have consequences. Maine Secretary of State determined this week that Trump should be barred from the primary ballot, citing his conduct surrounding January 6th Capitol riots as violating the 14th Amendment insurrection clause. Quote, I have very, very strong reservations about all of this, David Axelrod said in an Aaron Burnett Out Front interview on CNN. I do think it would rip the country apart if he were actually prevented from running because tens of millions of people want to vote for him. By the way, this is rich. The Florida Democratic Party literally canceled the Democratic primary so that they could just hand it to Joe Biden. He's totally entitled to it. No process, no democracy here. We're just going to hand it to him. David Axelrod hasn't said shit about the DNC canceling the Florida primary. And by the way, there's other ones too. They're trying to just not have a primary, even though Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, and Cenk Uygur are running against Biden. He said nothing about that, but he brings it up on this front for Trump. I think if you're going to beat Donald Trump, you're probably going to have to do it at the polls. And then when you do that, he'll turn around and say, you didn't beat me. And I should be in office anyway. And maybe I'll do another January 6th. In her decision, Shenna Bellows, Maine Secretary of State, said Trump used a false narrative of election fraud to inflame his supporters on January 6th and was aware of the likelihood for violence and at least initially supported its use given he both encouraged it with incendiary rhetoric and took no timely action to stop it. So anyway, here you have David Axelrod goes on and says, this plays into the narrative that when Trump says Democrats are politically motivated against me, and that could rile up his voters. That's the point he's making. But here's the thing. It's also, you're just upholding the law as well. You can't say, let's not take this correct legal action because the consequences might be bad. You can't make decisions like that. You can't run a country like that. This is how we get to the place where every single president who commits a crime is let off. Because like, oh, that might lead to problems and some people might not like it and, you know, it's unprecedented. Yeah, but it's also doing the right thing by the letter of the law. So I just don't find that a compelling argument. Axelrod said, quote, a lot of the motivation for Trump's candidacy was as a legal defense strategy. He wanted to set up a construct which says that they're coming after him because he's running for president and they're trying to prevent him from being president. We've run this experiment. He's only gained since he started getting indicted. What you thought might be kryptonite for him has turned out to be battery packs, and this is a big one for him. Yes, but again, what if you're just upholding the law? Okay, so now let's actually get to that conversation, because this is all that matters at the end of the day. People can like politic this and game it out and, well, what happens if this happens? And that. Here's the reality. This is the section of the Constitution in question. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against them or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may by a vote of 2/3 of each house remove such a disability. So in other words, the point that they're making here is nobody in any elected position across the entire United States can have that position. In the scenario where, quote, you shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But then they say you could, by a vote of 2/3, overrule that and basically come out and say, no, this person is allowed to run. Well, by the way, he's not going to get 2/3. He just doesn't have the numbers to get 2/3. So that's out of the question. Then the argument people make, which I thought early on, I thought this was convincing until I actually read the text of the Constitution. People say, well, he wasn't actually tried for insurrection or convicted of insurrection, so how could you do this? But it doesn't say that here in the Constitution. It doesn't say he has to be convicted of it. Go read it again. Rewind this video. Listen to it back one more time. Look, if you are being, just shut off your brain, read the amendment, and just apply it to Trump and ask yourself, does it fit? Not only does it fit, it fits in like a comically specific degree. I mean, it's ridiculous how well this fits. Because even if you say he didn't engage in insurrection or rebellion against the United States, which, by the way, I think he did, but even if you say, well, I think that's too strong language, then it goes on to say, well, did Trump give aid or comfort to the enemies of the U.S. who were doing the insurrection? That is undeniable. He was literally, promoting this January 6th rally for a while and saying, it's going to be wild. You guys need to show up. There's reporting about how he was saying it's okay if they're armed on that day. Remember that? There was a lot of talk behind the scenes about that, and his own staffers were aghast. He's like, you want to let these people show up and come to your speech with arms? And he's like, oh, they're not here with guns to use on me. It's for others. Then he gave the speech and said, we got to take our country back. Mike Pence better do the right thing. You got to take your country back with strength. Let's march to the Capitol. Let's be strong. Let's be strong. Mix this with his fraudulent elector scheme, his fake elector scheme. By the way, their words, not mine. They called it a fake elector scheme. They called it a fraudulent elector scheme. They're the ones who said this is an illegal vote counting scheme, and we're going to do it no matter what. Mix that with what happened on January 6th. Yes, he tried to do it. And even if you say he didn't directly engage in the insurrection, which I think he did, there's no doubt he gave aid and comfort to the enemies who were trying to do that. Even though it didn't work, even though it was Keystone Cops, even though these people were a mess, that was the intent. That's what they tried to do. He knew that. He led the charge. And we're going to have 2 court cases also that kind of prove that out in Georgia and in D.C. with the Jack Smith indictments. Okay. So does this fit or not? Look, here's my problem with the people who are casually and flippantly being like, he should run. If you're going to say that, engage with the legal argument. Say where this legal argument is incorrect. Give me any point that would argue, no, actually, you're wrong because here's my interpretation of the amendment, here's why it doesn't apply, et cetera, et cetera. Literally the best anybody's come up with, I'm not kidding about this, is actually it doesn't count. Not because Trump didn't do an insurrection, he actually did, but because the office of the presidency of the United States is technically not even an office, bro. I'm not kidding. There was a lower court that said that. There was a lower court that argued, no, we're not going to argue on the insurrection point. He did do an insurrection. We're going to argue that the presidency doesn't count as an office of the U.S. So in other words, look, if you believe in textualism, if you believe in originalism, which is the conservative judicial philosophy, the inevitable takeaway is, oh, if you apply this, the plain face reading of it, yeah, Trump's going to be kicked off. Trump's going to be kicked off. Now, will they actually do that? I think it's 70% likelihood they'll side with Trump and not kick him off. 30% likelihood that they do kick him off. So I think it's more likely than not that Trump will win, but not because he's right on the legal merits. In fact, I think this is sort of a slam dunk case if you do textualism and originalism and apply it. So again, to Cornel West, to Marianne Williamson, to David Axelrod, to anybody and everybody who would make this argument of like, actually, it's ridiculous and he should be able to run. Make an argument, because I haven't seen a single good argument. Nobody engages with the actual substance of the legal argument when they say he should be allowed on, and I'll finish on this fact. The argument that they're making of, well, it seems to be like, I don't really think this thing should even be in the Constitution. That seems to be the argument. It's like, well, I put democracy is so paramount that I don't even think this should be in the Constitution. Okay, well, again, take that up with the Constitution. Like, it is in there, so we need to actually, like, abide by it. But even if I grant you, okay, fine, maybe it shouldn't be in the Constitution, let's remember something. If your point is democracy is paramount and let the people decide. Well, like I said, number one, you should be crusading to get rid of term limits because that's undemocratic by definition. Number two, would you look at this? New poll, 54% of Americans approve of Colorado kicking Trump off the ballot, including a quarter of Republicans. A new poll conducted by YouGov America found that 54% of Americans and even 24% of Republicans approved of the Colorado Supreme Court's decision to kick former President Donald Trump off its 2024 presidential primary ballot. The court released its opinion, holding that Trump was ineligible to blah, 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 blah. Let me get to the more important numbers here. So like I said, 54% of the country in total. But then you also have a plurality of independents. 48% of independents say kick him off. Only 35% say don't kick him off. And for Republicans, it's higher than you would think. Almost 25% say kick him off the ballot. 66% say keep him on the ballot. So in other words, you have a strong majority saying, look, we're not idiots. We know he's a criminal. We know he's in no position to run the United States of America. We know what he tried to do last time when he tried to steal the election. And we know he's probably going to do that again. So the Democratic perspective, the majority of the country goes, I don't think he should be allowed on. By the way, poll people, do you think Trump has committed felonies? The numbers like over 60% say, yeah, I think he committed felonies. And then people also say, if you not even convicted of a felony, if you're even charged with a felony, you shouldn't be president. This is what the people think. So I don't like this sort of like, don't poke the bear, cuckish attitude of like, well, I disagree, and I think he should be allowed on the ballot. Okay, if you take that position, that is a legitimate position if you argue for it and engage on the legal merits, and nobody has engaged on the legal or constitutional merits. It's just this sort of glib, default, something democracy, allow him on. I'm not going to engage with Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. I'm not going to engage with the Constitution. I'm not going to engage with any of the legal arguments. I'm not going to engage with the polls that say he should be kicked off. I'm not going to engage with the polls that say he committed felonies, and because of that, he also shouldn't be able to run. I'm not going to engage with the 91 criminal charges. I'm not going to engage with the 17,000 reasons why perhaps he should not be allowed to run. But I'll just flippantly and glibly say something democracy. I want to be on the ballot, so I guess he should be too. You didn't commit an insurrection, Cornel West. You didn't commit an insurrection, Marianne Williamson. And if you're going to make the point you made, argue for it on the merits. I haven't seen that at all. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.